Hello and welcome again. So, are you ready for today's session? First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you're from, please give me a thumbs up in the chat or say hello, tell us where you're from, and we will get started. So, again, this is very exciting. We've been talking about a lot of this stuff for quite some time over the last 12 months and drawing from the book, Leadership Intelligence Handbook, 196 different situations and strategies, how to deal with them. It hopefully becomes your leadership thesaurus to figure out the land of the dynamics of your team and your leadership style, etc. That's what this is all about. So again, I'm just making sure the technology is working before we dive into it, and I will get started. So let me do that. Let's turn this on. It looks like we're good to go. So we're talking about the COARS methodology and how that's evolved. Why has that come into play? And what does it mean to you in terms of the leadership and business behavior intelligence integration? So if you like, the leadership is on one side, business is on the other side, behavior is the bridge that links the two. And COARS is the methodology that I've developed to help bring those two together. If you like, what's happened over the years is, what we see is a lot of people, a lot of organizations. Let me just maybe move ahead on the slides here. There we go. Right. A lot of organizations spending a lot of money and time on one side or the other side, but not really talking about the two together. And if you've been on any of my sessions, you know that I can't split the two. There is nothing in business that doesn't bring behavior and leadership into it, and there's nothing in leadership that doesn't impact the business. So, we often see organizations spending a lot of money on leaders and development, or leaders doing self-development, reading books, studying different techniques, all of these things, but they're really, putting blinders on. I've seen so many coaches, consultants, talking to organizations about the business and literally doing this, saying, I don't deal with the behavior side of things. I just deal with the impact on the numbers, the KPIs, the processes, and that's it. On the leadership side, we're seeing HR doing a lot of people development, educating leaders on their styles, their dynamics, their biases, all of these things that I've talked about for last year, but not really bridging the two. So, it's a very expensive. I talked about this last session. It's over $300 billion of spending. I need to go back to those slides, but it's devastating the amount of money that's being thrown on each of those without really getting the results. 70% of those efforts and more fail because of that. We've seen employee engagement, we've seen Six Sigma, Lean, all of these things working in isolation. And now COARS is the bridge. COARS is the journey of a 4-stage process that you can then scale unlimited times throughout your organization, with your team, your products, whatever it is you are doing, COARS is now the 4-level certification process that teaches organizations how to marry the two to create sustainable, successful growth and scaling the operations in the business. So, what are we going to cover today? I'm going to talk more about that because really I want to make sure I cover this properly so that when we start talking over the coming weeks, just like we did in the past year with the leadership side of things, we're now going to talk about the business aspects of things and the business operation, and we'll really cement the connection between the two. So today I want to revisit some of those things, talk about the one principle, discuss the bridge and what that means. Are you bridging the two well enough, and where are you headed with that? Give you some proof so that you can proceed with that. All right. So let's dive into the first topic, which is revisiting the leadership intelligence. And again, the book, if you haven't got it, Leadership Intelligence Handbook, grab that. It's on Amazon and on our website as well. There's a link there. So, LIQ, I spent about 40 webinars talking about that journey, right? It was a full year really actually without talking about COARS directly. It was kind of a backhanded way. I wanted to take people through the journey before saying, hey, yeah, this is actually a methodology that you can complete. And you would start with the calibrate step, which is in LISA, which we have online, and it's just biqorg.com/LISA. It's a free assessment. Get on there and start your journey. It starts with the calibration, your self-awareness, your emotional intelligence, all of these things. So, it was a deliberate journey, and the book is in 4 parts, just like the COARS methodology, the 4 parts, right? So if you want to read along or work along with that, you can watch the webinars. Every webinar, every session, I shouldn't call them webinars anymore. These are all training session, educational sessions, workshops, etc. that I run in conjunction with each chapter relates to a part of the book and a session aligned with that. So the process in the 4 parts, there they are there on the screen. The invisible drivers, what drives you. So this is part 1 is your internal motivations, drivers, biases, judgments, all of these things that have gotten you to where you are today, your survival mechanisms, if you like, that are built into you, and understanding yourself before you can understand others. So part 2 is then that observation of situations and other people and what's happening, so you can actually now transfer your own biases and filters through others. And AccuMatch is our deeper master's level, if you like, assessment tool that dives into the behaviors. So if you like, COARS is the journey to awareness and dynamics, and AccuMatch is the like the blood work or the MRI of the behaviors that you exhibit, your team exhibits, the culture. I've talked about all those things. And so part 3 of the book was, well, still is, about the aligning of your leadership style once you know yourself and others, and you can observe that, you can start to adapt and adjust accordingly. And finally, part 4 is really the restructuring of the organization from a leadership and behavioral side of things, and seeing the impact that it starts to have on the business. And that's why we've come to this point where I talk about now the bridge into the business side of things. So reviewing some of that, write down some of the principles that you've learned if you followed along, right? But even if you haven't, look at one of the things that you've tried to implement and what's worked and what hasn't worked. Why has it worked and why hasn't it worked is really the conversation that we're going to have today, and I'll explain that in a moment. So, second part, now we talk about what was missed. Okay, so leaders treat personal development separate from business strategy. They have their business strategy meetings, but I've never been to a business strategy meeting that actually has a behavioral strategy component that is tied into that. And that's really what we're talking about, is let's just take those blinders off and open our mind to the fact that the two need to go together. And as it says on the slide there, a lot of people read a lot of self-development books, and there is a lot of books, but they all focus on just one side. Even a lot of the methodologies that I talked about last week, Six Sigma, Lean, EOS, etc. And then you flip on to the other side and you look at DISC and Hogan and all of these self-awareness tools, and none of them really have brought the two together. And that's what COARS is really all about, is saying you can't separate the two. Guys, let's just stop doing that. Let's move into the integrated understanding of the two. So when we start looking at the parallels, and I did a little chart that's a brief summary of the parallels of that journey, the COARS, the C, O, A, R, and S for scaling. Really, this is what we're talking about. So when we take the first part of self-awareness, there is a business assessment that needs to take place to assess your current state, right? So that's the first step. When we talk about emotional regulations, we need to look at the business from the decision biases that take place in business. When we talk about observation and behavior, we often refer to the data metrics that are in place. What are we listening to? Are we watching market competition, market trends, what's happening? I talked about, we're all hyped about AI and what's happening. But, just the other day, I was visiting one of our local restaurants, and they hadn't done that. Right? And so new restaurant opened down the road. Guess what? Everybody's gone over there because they didn't prepare to deal with the fact that was going to happen, right? So it doesn't matter what type of business, all of these things are relevant in every business, in every situation. So the translation now is, leaders who pause before acting build a company that is pressure tested for decisions. So that was the methodology that we talked about last year. So leaders who listen and put feedback loops in place, they are building resilience within the organization and growth and so on. So leaders who take ownership set the example of accountability within the culture. So you're building the culture through mirroring on yourself. The methodology that we are talking about, the COARS methodology, becomes the constant. It doesn't matter whether it's business or leadership, COARS works in both. All right. So I hope you are picking that up. Come on. My clicker has stopped clicking. There we go. So name your bridge. Take 3 principles from the leadership intelligence inventory, and write down the equivalent on the other side, just like we did with that chart that I shared earlier, right? So every leadership situation has a business impact, right? So when you're trying to resolve something on the leadership side, it's impacting business. And if you're trying to deal with a business KPI, for instance, or new software or whatever you're releasing, what is the leadership that needs to be taking place? What's the behavior intelligence, if you like? If the two are like this, then behavior intelligence is the glue, okay, that brings the two together. That's why behavior intelligence has been so important. It's the foundation behind leadership intelligence, behind ActiMatch, behind all of the methodologies and tools that we've developed. So let's look at those stages, right? We're going to start with the C from COARS, which is the calibrate, and we're going to look at the personal versus the organizational side of things. And we'll do that with each letter so that you really get the sense of the importance of the two. So on the leadership side, you get to learn your blind spots, your biases and assumptions. They're all your internal stuff. On the business side, we look at the KPIs, the processes, and some of the market assumptions that we do. These are just examples, right? Now, the leader who skips self-awareness makes the same mistakes louder, right? Okay. The business that skips the calibration side of things will just scale its current dysfunction. We talk about that in a lot of business coaching. If you're losing a little bit of money and you spend a lot of money marketing that, guess what? You're going to lose a great deal more money. And so the same applies to, if you haven't learned about yourself and you continue to do what you've always done, you just get more of what you were getting that you didn't like, right? The O, so observing on the LIQ side of things, it's about reading people, interpreting what's going on, clearly separating facts from interpretation and judgments and biases. Because you learned that about yourself, you start to open your eyes about understanding others better. On the business side of things, we need to track what actually happens. Well, look at the KPIs from its source rather than its outcome. Okay, so not looking at just the reports because they are after the fact, but actually looking at what's generated those. And so again, if we don't do it that way, leaders who can't observe, they'll never lead, right? You need to be able to observe what's happening. And businesses that can't observe can't adapt. All right, so now we move into the A of COARS, which is adapting. And, maybe the word changing is a bit strong for you, but improving, okay, your leadership style, but improving the operations at the same time. So when you look at yourself and others, you start to understand what you need to improve and modify or change if it's that extreme. for yourself, for your leadership, in order to get the results that you were hoping to get, right? The intention, right? Communicating properly under pressure, having feedback loops, all of these things, putting those things in place that help you to improve. On the business side, it's the same, what's the analysis that you're doing? Are you doing pilot projects, or are you just leaping into launches or changes without really observing the impact of the organization? And when you do one without the other, you are missing the opportunity of really making things work properly. Mm-hmm. The R is about restructuring, redesigning, re-engineering, any of those things. And really, again, once you have made it, and that's why COARS is a 4-step process, you can't do this if you haven't built the foundation up to that, right? So now you can restructure the organization, the leadership, the habits, the culture, if you like, because that's what a habit is. When it's the consistent habit of a group of people, we call it the culture, right? And on the business side, it's the incentives, the infrastructure, the impact on the business processes through restructuring the processes to improve. Whether you start looking at Six Sigma or Lean and measuring time between different activity in a manufacturing plant or different activity in a service industry, it's the same. You can apply the methodologies to both of those. So we look at those, and we are again asking the question of the ability to I know a lot of people talk about resilience, but really it's about sustaining growth and being able to scale it without falling back, right? So scale is really not a 5th certification. It's really when you've done all 4 certifications, you can scale, you become COARS certified at that level, right? And it means when you are COARS certified, you are really saying you are aware of the people and business side of things and the integration of the two through behavior intelligence, right? Okay, and there is behavior on the business side, and there's behavior on the people side, the operations and the leadership. So practice, take a moment and think about your business and where maybe you have, whether by accident or by intention, a strong bridge between the two, and where you maybe have a broken connection, silos in your organization. And silos aren't necessarily about departments and organizational silos. They're also about within a single team, you can still have a silo effect happening when business strategy and operations is looked at separate from the people development side of things. So they need to be looked at. In fact, we did this, I want to say 30, 40 years ago, when we were consulting to major corporations during the business re-engineering movement of James Champy and Hammer at that time. I ran the Catalyst methodology and looking at processes, but also looking at the behavioral impact of those processes, the the design of the software or the reports back then. We didn't have all the technology that we have today, and we didn't have AI. So, this isn't something new. This is something that I've worked with for over 4 decades. So it's really stuff that's proven, it works, it's really powerful when you embrace it. Okay. Fourth, now let's talk about the proof. Here are some examples. I've seen this in person. So these are real stories of what's happened. I worked with an organization. We did a lot of work at the senior level, the executive level, and coaching at that level, but it didn't filter down because they didn't really feel like it was necessary. They wanted to own it. It was like the closed room space. We don't want to take them away from their work. So it didn't really get the effect that they were looking for long-term in the organization. And the flip side is organizations, I've talked about this a lot as well, where they've brought in new technology, new systems, new processes, but completely failed to recognize the impact on the team. So everybody reverted back to their old habits, and it didn't take place. In contrast, when we do this, right, the organization that modeled both the accountability and the behavior, developed the disciplines and the culture in order to really sustain that. Okay, so if sustainability is the foundation of resilience, then that's what really this is all about. It's bridging the two together. So the compound effect, leadership intelligence without business application will plateau, right? Business transformation without behavioral foundation regresses back to the old habits because, as I mentioned last week, the biggest pushback you will get for any new product rollout is going to be on the behavioral side, and regression happens through that, not because of the technology, right? So when both connect through the COARS methodology, the revolution or evolution deepens throughout the organization. You can then scale it. If you start with the pilots, the way we talk about it, you can easily scale to that level. Okay. So your bridge audit, okay, name one initiative in your organization that failed or stalled. Okay, it's simple. You can easily observe that. I know quite a few organizations, actually just in the last week that I've talked to, that can easily tell you that they stalled or they haven't been able to effectively implement new systems or new behaviors, the culture, because of one or the other. So take a good look at that. And look at the missing part of the bridge. This is easy stuff, right? I'm not, creating rocket science here. We're not talking neuroscience. So you don't have to learn to be a master psychologist or a computer engineer. I've been through all of those trainings and educations and ran lots of organizations, lots of businesses of my own. So this is real life experience, and it's bridging that together. Yeah. So the integration, the complete picture, right? So LIQ, leadership intelligence, will transform the leaders. Business intelligence transforms the business. Isn't it time we brought these two together? The methodology doesn't change. The COARS methodology works on both. That's what I love about this, right? I can, be faced with a business problem and we go through COARS. If we have a leadership problem or team dynamics problem, we go through COARS. The methodology is the same. Okay, so when you master the methodology, you don't have to become a master computer engineer or process mapper or analyst or any of those. You need to master the methodology. Okay, then you can do anything, right? It's almost like, actually, I just realized, one of the methodologies that I learned very young is Sherlock Holmes, the process of elimination. Okay? And that's just so powerful to so many different areas. He uses it to just, eliminate all the people that are not the murderer, right? In software, we eliminate all the code that is irrelevant, because so many times I've seen people spend a lot of time looking at so much stuff that's just noise that's getting in the way of the reality, and you need to eliminate, right? So learning, I digress, I apologize, but learning a good methodology that you can rely on that applies to anything is huge. It's powerful, right? Okay, it's better than your master's degree, your PhD, any of those things. Just learn the methodology and you'll do great. Another methodology is learning where to find stuff, right? Don't wait to be taught. Learn how to find things yourself, okay? That's also a really cool methodology. I digress. So your implementation roadmap, we'll go through this throughout the whole series as I cover another 32 sessions on this topic, looking at many different areas of the organization, the structure, and tying the two together. So if you haven't been through the LIQ already, the Leadership Intelligence Handbook is a good foundation for you to get a lot of knowledge. Think of it like if you're going to learn a sport, you can't just suddenly join a competition, right? You need to learn the basics first, the foundational components. We did that a lot when we were training people in AccuMatch. This is how we become good and proficient at anything, right? Okay, so the book is really about learning a lot of little things. You don't know how they're going to apply until you do that. Then when you get a situation, you know where to look, where to reference that. Okay. So take a moment, reflect on some of these questions as I wrap up here. Okay. Where are you on a personal level, organizational level? Look at COARS to assess the four areas: the calibrate, observe, adapt, restructure, so you can scale it. Okay, so look at it from that lens. Your assignment before next week: pick one. All right, write it down. Identify where there might be gaps so we can actually explore that and look at that together. If you're interested in doing this in our training certification, do reach out. My information is just Nagui at BIQorg.com. Okay, so next week we start that journey. We'll start with the business blind spots. We've talked about the leadership blind spots in LIQ. Now BIQ will dive into that. Okay, so Nagui at BIQorg.com. I should have that on that screen, but you can find me. Even if you go to the BIQorg.com, you can always click the link and ask for a follow-up, a meeting, and we will meet and help you figure out that journey in your organization. Okay, so without further ado, so just a quick one, COARS. It is the blue, green, orange, red, so that you can complete your certification. And I look forward to seeing you online, and enjoy. See you next week.